will join us soon. So this is David Brown, Senior Associate with the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and so welcome to this webinar on moving mental health systems from perpetuating disparities, promoting culturally relevant healing. This particular webinar is an adaptation of a workshop that was presented at the JDAI Intersite Conference back in October in Seattle. This particular session, which was very well attended. The room was filled, and we had very good reviews of that workshop based on after the conference. So we decided it would be one of the sessions that we would bring to the JDI network through JDI Connect. So this is one of a series of conference-related workshops that we are presenting to the network to broaden the access to this information. The session was based on a report that was completed by an alliance of mental health organizations representing minority communities, including the African American, Latino, Native American, and Asian associations, and also with the American Psychological Association. And the report was completed last year, and we found it to be very compelling, and brought it to the conference, and then of course wanted to bring it to this group here. We have on the panel today not only Cheryl Gills, who was one of the principal authors of the report, who in the past president of the Association of Black Psychologists, but also representatives of the Latino Association and the American Psychological Association, who will also be presenting on the panel, as well as a representative from a program in Portland that actually has been working with Latinx community and has demonstrated practices and put in place practices that reflect many of the recommendations that emerged from the report. So, so I think with that, Cheryl, are you with us? I still don't hear her. So yeah. We're going to pass it on to Evie Garcia, who represents the Association of Latinx psychology. You can get the names correct, Evie. I know that's not right, and she will kind of present her remarks. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Evie Garcia. I'm from Northern Arizona, and I got involved in this project when I was president of the National Latinx Psychological Association. Next slide. I plan to give just a very brief overview, specifically focused on Latinx issues, and Cheryl and others will address more kind of broad issues as well that include Latinx but aren't specific to Latinx. So about at least 18,000 Latino youth are incarcerated annually, and they're 2 or 3 times more likely to be incarcerated than white youth. Next slide. So one of the things from a mental health perspective, because I'm a psychologist, is looking at problems in the mental health field. And one of the problems is overdiagnosis. So depression and conduct disorder are overdiagnosed for Latinx youth. And as you may know, conduct disorder is a precursor for antisocial personality disorder, which is one of the most common diagnoses in prison systems today. So there's an overdiagnosis of that issue with Latinx youth, as well as an underdiagnosis of trauma, which is much more common in communities of color. In addition, mental health professionals will also tend to disproportionately refer Latinx youth for punishment in the schools, such as suspension or other types of punishment, or for criminal sanctions, rather than for mental health treatment. So that's kind of like the trifecta problem that is occurring as well from a mental health perspective. Next slide, please. One of the things that is really important to Latinx youth is the fact that there's a greater community monitoring by police and disproportionately high involvement in the justice system. Latinx youth have more negative perspectives of police primarily. It doesn't really expand to judges. So it's specific to police, these negative attitudes. And they're finding in the research that youth's first contact with police is really important in terms of setting these attitudes and then further offending. So next slide, please. So here we have an example of the cycle. So you've got arrests, and then you have negative attitudes that are based on arrests. This is what we're seeing in the research. In addition, there is less reporting of crime and victimization in communities that are having trouble. So when there are negative attitudes toward police, Latinx youth who are victims of crime and bullying tend not to report it, which increases trauma. And then that in addition to patterns of policing in poor neighborhoods, again leads to more arrest, and the cycle goes around and around. So I'm doing some research right now on the effects in college of involvement in the youth justice system, and we're finding that people are saying that they struggled in their first arrest, and they attribute that to differential policing patterns in their neighborhoods. Next slide. One of the biggest things with Latinx youth is failure in communication. So it starts in the schools with failure in communication between educators and students, also school administrators and families, and between law enforcement and the youth and their families, and then finally in the court system. Next slide. So linguistic skills are an issue that is specific to the Latinx population. And good linguistic skills, ability to speak English well, to read well, are key to emotional health and academic success. In the justice systems and in prisons and jails, there are more youth that are linguistically diverse. And in addition, Latinx youth tend not to be placed in special education while they're incarcerated when they need it, when they qualify for it. And they have lower achievement than either Black or white youth who are also incarcerated. Next slide. So in addition, there's a problem with documentation. Once the youth get to the court system, interpreters are not always available. In addition, there's a problem with documents not being translated into Spanish, so that families cannot ensure that their children receive due process, and they can't, because they can't understand everything that's happening. Next slide. So to wrap it up, there's 5 key recommendations. So we need treatment of trauma in the Latinx youth community. There need to be culturally and linguistically grounded assessments that lead to more effective referrals for mental health treatment instead of referrals to the justice system. In addition, there needs to be more education regarding misdiagnosis and overdiagnosis of Latinx youth so that we can get them the help that they need that is more accurate. Spanish language documentation and communication in the juvenile justice system needs to be improved, and there also needs to be more careful attention to the attitudes that Latinx youth develop, particularly after their first involvement with the police. And that's it for me today. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so we're going to I guess Cheryl's still not able to connect, so we're going to move to Jennifer Kelly, who is the president-elect of the American Psychological Association, which has been a key partner in this effort as part of the alliance, and she's going to speak particularly to the issues as they impact African American youth. And I'm sorry I don't have her complete bio, but like I said, so I apologize, Jennifer, I'm not being able to give you a more complete introduction. But take it from here.
That's fine. Good afternoon, and I'm looking forward to presenting this information that I have. As previously noted, I currently serve as the president-elect of the American Psychological Association, and I am in independent practice in Atlanta, Georgia, and board certified in clinical health psychology. Next slide, please. So I want to let you know that I became involved with this project last year before last, several years ago actually, when I was part of the alliance representing the American Psychological Association as the recording secretary for the organization. But what I want to do today is really focus on some of the disparities that exist within the juvenile justice system. And the disparities occur as they relate to the prevention and early intervention, provision of services that are available, confinement, use of screening and assessment tools, pretrial detention, policing and arrest, and finally, in terms of adjudication and disposition. Next slide, please. So we know that prevention and early intervention strategies can be effective in terms of preventing mental health problems that could emerge and in terms of preventing interest into the juvenile justice system for youth of color. However, what we see is that there's very little attention and resources dedicated to developing these effective, culturally appropriate strategies, whether it's prevention and early intervention strategies and models for the youth of color. And disparity exists in terms of the placement of the African American youth in the prevention and the early intervention strategies such as the diversion programs. Of the juveniles who are arrested, the Black juveniles are 3 times as likely to be processed and less likely to be diverted than the white juveniles. And among the youth of color, we know that internalizing mental health needs such as the depression and the anxiety, they're more likely to go unmet relative to the white youth. And at the same time, there's attention given to externalizing behaviors such as what people would call oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder. Next slide, please. So one of the concerns that we have is related to the screening and assessment tools. And what we found is that they have not been adequately validated across the various ethnic and cultural groups. And we know that these assessment procedures that have not been validated on the youth of color have contributed to the racial disparities. So, for example, the Black males are 40% more likely to be diagnosed with conduct disorder than whites, and Black females are 54% more likely to be diagnosed with conduct disorder than whites. And Dr. Garcia earlier stated that conduct disorder is really kind of like a precursor to the antisocial diagnosis. So as an adolescent, as a youth, you'll be diagnosed with conduct disorder, and it goes on to the adult years and it's antisocial diagnosis. And we know that Black and Latinx males are approximately 40% less likely to be diagnosed with a less severe diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder than are the white males. Next slide, please. So in terms of confinement in the juvenile justice system, by the numbers, the Black youth are 5 times more likely to be incarcerated than white youth. And the Black youth are more than 5 times likely to be confined as their white peers. And we looked at California and we noticed that the Blacks and Latinx account for 60% of the children detained in the juvenile facilities. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we're concerned about is what happens when there's this education, the school to prison pipeline is what we're seeing in this an education system kind of collusion. So nationwide, Black students are about 60% of the student population, but they represent over 30% of the school-related arrests. And once suspended, the Black students comprise 42% of the students suspended multiple times. And once expelled or suspended, the Black students are 2 times more likely to be arrested while out of school. And 70% of the students referred to law enforcement who experience school-related arrests are Black and Latinx youth. And this is it's just hard to even think about this, that nearly half of all preschool students suspended are Black. They should be in school. Next slide, please. So, APA, the American Psychological Association, has been doing some advocacy work on juvenile justice. So in 2017, APA wrote a letter, had contact with Senator Cory Booker, noting its opposition to juvenile solitary confinement. And APA noted that it should not be used as a means of discipline except in the most extreme short-term cases if it has to occur. And the children and adolescents must have access to age-appropriate services and programming to help prepare them to return to the community as healthy and productive youth. And APA advocated in one of the reports to prioritize prevention programs and identify and serve the at-risk juveniles and their families, and emphasize diversion for justice-involved youth with behavioral health needs. And APA has shown a commitment to the importance of looking at culture and the context in developing these screening and assessment tools as well as treatment. Last year, APA had a work group looking at health disparities in boys and men, and these are some of the key findings and recommendations from that report. They noted that we should intensify adult and juvenile justice efforts to keep the males of color out of prisons and the jails, incentivize, expand, and support state and local programs to assist boys and men who are re-entering communities from prisons and jails to prevent the reoffending, and to develop and evaluate strategies to keep LGBTQ boys and men of color and males retained and engaged in schools, family and community life, and the workforce. So what APA has done is that it's very consistent with the findings that we found in the Annie E. Casey Foundation work, and making some of the recommendations that would address some of the concerns in the report, without seeing the Annie E. Casey Foundation report, but showing their commitment to juvenile justice. And that concludes my component.
Thank you. Could you go back one slide, Brian? Back one slide to the slide number 2 in the slide deck. Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Cheryl Gills, Professor of Psychology at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles and Director of our Applied Research Center. I'm also past President of the Association of Black Psychologists and Chair of the Sybil Brand Commission in Los Angeles County that conducts inspections of the county's adult jails, juvenile lockups, and child welfare and probation group homes for children. My apologies for all the technical difficulties. It's a presenter's nightmare, but we shall press forward. It is really a pleasure and an honor to be able to share with you the work of what is called the Alliance of National Psychological Associations for Racial and Ethnic Equity. The Alliance was formed in 2013, and at that time included the Society of Indian Psychologists. The organizations or the national associations, psychological associations that were involved in the production of the report included the Association of Black Psychologists, the Asian American Psychological Association, the American Psychological Association, the National Latinx Psychological Association, and the Society of Indian Psychologists. Next slide, please. And so the report that you've been hearing some pieces of up to this point is entitled The Color of Justice, the Landscape of Traumatic Justice, Youth of Color in Conflict with the Law. And this report includes contributions from those most affected by the juvenile justice system, the youth themselves. Next slide, please. And so we actually started the report intentionally with voices of the youth who have been impacted and who have been entangled in the juvenile justice system. And the thing that's important about the youth contribution is, first and foremost, when we were preparing the report and gathering their contributions, they said, "Name us." They said, "We have been invisible for far too long. People do not see us in the system. They do not understand us, and they do not engage us." And so their comments reflect a range of examples of how they experience the system, how they are in a state of nervous system upregulation, how they are dealing with cross-generational trauma and dealing with a society and institutions that devalue them, and that they're living in trauma-filled communities. Next slide, please. And so you see that you have, for example, Kenny saying that by the time he got to high school, his mind was filled with pain and his emotions were easily triggered. And he was trying to survive without the essential tools and skills that most people are equipped with to succeed in society. And so are we understanding things from their perspective? If we really, truly did, I think we would already be doing some things very, very differently. So the report, next slide, please, presents a particular kind of framing, and that framing includes very, very critical attention to context, race, and culture. The fact that the juvenile justice system needs to operate from, we argue, a social ecological lens, that multiple systems collude in the school-to-prison pipeline that then has our children at disproportionate rates in the system, and that youth of color not only feel, but the data suggests they are targeted through a variety of, for a variety of reasons. Next slide, please. And so another framing then is the report operates from a social ecological perspective, kind of building off of Bronfenbrenner's ecological model. It includes attention to issues of intersectionality, including sexual orientation and gender identity, SOGI issues. And it also operates from the perspective of understanding trauma, not just personal trauma, but also communal trauma. Next slide, please. And so this trauma also is historical. It has a past and a present. It influences health disparities. It impacts the way in which members of the community experience systems in society and how those systems actually treat communities of color. And if we understand Zora Neale Hurston's, if you could advance point of view on this, Zora Neale Hurston said, "The present was an egg laid by the past that had the future inside its shell." So we have to understand how America's racialized history impacts the systems that engage our children. Next slide, please. The last framing I want to mention at this point is the framing that understands that when it comes to youth of color, if you look at Philip Atiba Goff's work and some other people's work, youth of color, and particularly in the anti-Black reality of American society, children are not seen as children. Children are adultified. And not only are they adultified, but the kind of normal reactions you would have to children like a need and feeling compelled to protect and seeing innocence first is not what happens for Black children in the system or for children of color. In addition to this adultification of children, you have the operation of implicit bias. And it happens both at the individual level and at the institutional level. And it permeates the different kinds of tools and practices that we have that kind of have built-in problematic biases that kind of warp our understanding of, our view of, and therefore our interaction with youth of color. So if we could now advance to the presentation for I'm sorry, slide 27, which describes the community-based approaches. I wanted to share with you that we have some understanding about what would look differently in a context that lifts up some of the things that we identify in the Color of Justice report. So here's one example of a youth engagement for youth at risk and involved in the juvenile justice system in Los Angeles County. It's a 12-week program that serves youth 12 to 17 in a school-based setting, and their goal is to keep youth of color out of the system. And what I really want you to pay attention to are the methodologies that they lift up. Their approach, their strategies, their intervention is very much culturally grounded, starting with the words that are used, the incorporation of a worldview about what makes you a human being, like the inclusion of masculine and feminine energies and how they complement each other, the use of cultural principles like face and heart, and that the youth's heart, their authentic self is present, but also their character and refinement. And then how they use, in terms of methodology, the power of the arts that our children really do resonate and respond to. The incorporation of rites of passage, having a strengths-based approach, and essentially a perspective that says, teach from the perspective that every person is capable of great and vital transformation, and that our young people have an inexhaustible reservoir of imagination, creativity, and options. The methodology includes diverse activities in school, after school, weekends, retreats, talking circles, and the methodology includes an intersectional trauma-informed curriculum. So next slide, please. This is actually work based on an initiative in Los Angeles County. That particular project is an example of one of 59 projects funded in the Ready to Rise initiative in LA County that is really a broad and diverse cross-section of community-based organizations doing engagement with youth who are at risk or involved with the juvenile justice system. We've done site visits, my research team, with 20 of the to try to understand both how they approach the program and how they understand outcomes. And one of the things that's quite refreshing is that their outcomes look a lot more like the kinds of issues lifted up in the Color of Justice report than what we typically see in outcomes in the mental health and juvenile justice and education systems. And so the kinds of benchmarks of success that they identified are listed here for you in this particular slide, but pretty much almost unanimous across the programs is the centrality of relational, communal, collectivist shifts in youth, that the kind of the heart of what provides a meaningful change in a youth's life has to be increased connectedness and sense of community and understanding of their communal, cultural perspective. And so, and then other things like their ethnic and racial identity and self-awareness and regulation. The importance of a shift in our youth in terms of hope, healing, critical consciousness, understanding that they are in a racialized world, understanding that they have been historically and currently targeted by systems that operate with some serious concerns around implicit bias. All the way down, you finally get to things that we typically see: academic improvement and vocational engagement. Next slide, please. And so one of the things that we offer are some examples of, like, what do these community groups mean by some of these particular concepts or outcome variables. And they look very different from current practice, but they look very aligned with what has been in this particular report. So we've actually designed for this initiative an approach to evaluation of outcomes that involves a tool, a measurement tool, that reflects these perspectives and moves away from Likert scales and solely predefined outcome indicators. And in fact, the outcome measure includes in it only one outcome that cuts across all of the organizations. The remaining outcomes are defined by each individual youth. And then we are in the current status of piloting. Well, actually, we've completed piloting, and the youth actually like the tool. And we're about to launch this different approach to evaluation across the 59 programs, recognizing that these benchmarks of change need to be on our radar screen as critical factors in a change process and any transformation with our youth. So the next slide, please. You can find or access the report in multiple places, but this is also, you can get it at the Alliance website or at the Psychology Applied Research Center website, and also through JDAI Connect. So now it is my pleasure.
Yeah,
Next slide.
yes, before we move on to Jimena, I just want to ask just two questions for the panel who've already presented. There's one question actually directed at Evie, but others can tackle this one also, is what do you feel contributes to the overdiagnosis of Latinx youth or minority youth in general?
I think there's a couple of things. One is that I think there's a failure in training programs to actually train multicultural skills in diagnosis and treatment. I think we're much more likely to talk about different groups and look at diversity issues, but we don't actually, where the rubber hits the road is what do you do when someone's in front of you, what are you seeing? And I don't think we address that very well, such that trauma, symptoms of trauma are misinterpreted as behavioral problems for youth of color. So that's what I think contributes to it.
Anybody else like to tackle that question? Go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, and I think that there's the other component, looking at those assessment and evaluation tools, and they don't look at the culture and the context in which certain types of behaviors do occur. So that's one of the challenges, is that they're not validated on the various ethnic and diverse ethnic and racial groups. The other thing that we must be aware of is that there can also be implicit bias there. And we always have to be aware that that can be part of that and really address that and confront that issue. But I think that if we had those assessment tools that can look at the culture and the context of the evaluation process and of the individual, I think that can go a long ways with that.
Right. I would just encourage folks to I was just going to say I would encourage folks to take a look at the report because we also do go into some discussion about this issue of overdiagnosis, underdiagnosis, and misdiagnosis, and some of the factors that contribute to that.
And then two quick questions for you, Cheryl. Is the evaluation that's given to the youth, is that complete? And also, where can people find the tool that you said the youth enjoy?
So the tool, we just literally finished piloting the tool with the last site last week, and we will be rolling it out with the first 20 organizations in about another week, and then with the remaining 39 organizations in a couple of weeks after that. Once all of the organizations are up and running with the tool, we can make it public so other folks can see it. It's really different. And actually, for us and for the youth, pretty refreshing. And it's based on some work that came out of the UK that looks at a different way of trying to think about evaluation metrics and methods. So if you could check back with me in about a month, we may be at a point where we can share it with folks.
Okay, so you can kind of turn it over to Jimena now.
Yeah, so it's my pleasure to introduce Jimena Ospina Todd, who has devoted her professional life to community-based nonprofit work with organizations serving youth and immigrant populations. As a Community Stability and Support Services Director at Latino Network, Jimena oversees the Community Healing Initiative, CHI program, the Early Intervention Program with Multnomah County, the Raices Family Navigation and Mentoring Programs in Washington County, Oregon, and the Community Diversion Program for Clackamas County, Oregon. Jimena?
Hi, how are you? So some of the recommendations that were put out in the report have been put into place here in Multnomah County in Oregon through our Community Healing Initiative program. So I'm going to talk about our program and our cultural specific way of services. So the Community Healing Initiative was started in 2011 as a partnership between the Department of Community Justice and two local community-based agencies with long ties to and history in the community here in Portland, Oregon. POIC, which stands for Portland Opportunities Industrialization Center, and Latino Network. So the Community Healing Initiatives, or CHI services, supports and interventions were first designed to focus on youth on probation who had involvement with high-risk activities and behaviors such as violence and gun violence. Our culturally specific model of services, youth and families sit at the center and chart their path with our guidance. Next slide, Brian, please. CHI is one of the many programs within Latino Network. Latino Network is a local community-based organization founded in 1996 by community members who started getting together to discuss issues impacting our community. And they also saw opportunities. And since then, we've grown substantially and are now an agency that provides services ranging from early childhood, school-based services, parent engagement services at local schools, leadership development, and we also have our own advocacy department doing a policy level work. Our vision here at Latino Network is a thriving Latino community that is respected, engaged, and engaged. And our staff has both professional expertise in our relevant fields, as well as shared lived experiences that enable our program participants to identify with us. So we are a culturally specific nonprofit with the majority of our staff and board members identifying as Latino. Next slide. And Brian, you need to click all of like a bunch of times here. Okay. So our program model was developed after looking at the specific history of Latinos in Oregon, as well as the historical, social oppressions and local social barriers that our community has had to face. We understand the reality of our community and meet every family and their youth in the unique ways these factors manifest in their lives. We join families where they are at the moment when we first meet them, and then we invite them into dialogue of social accountability to help them support their youth and build responsible, positive behaviors. We also understand that in order to support the development of self-sufficient and social accountable families, we have to influence the intrapersonal experience of the youth and the social process with the families and the young person. So we are committed and guided by 8 principles: hope, respeto, and we left that in Spanish very on purpose because it carries a different weight than saying respect, that respeto means respect. Familismo, which is I am family, and family helps family, and it's this interconnectedness that is almost unconditional and not bounded by age or distance. We're also guided by the principle of empowerment, social justice, cultural pride, accountability, not just from the youth, but also from the system and the families and the community. And all of this is bounded by confianza, which means trust. So we cannot do any of this without having trust with the family, with the young person, with our staff, and with our system partners as well. Next slide, please, Brian. So the county's commitment to reducing ethnic and racial disparities in the system and the success of our CHI probation program led to the development of the CHI Early Intervention and Diversion Program. So we got the probation principles and the values and adapted them to a light version. It's just a shorter time and less intensive. So I'm going to just talk about the program itself. So it's a community, the CHI Early Intervention Program. It's a community-based early intervention and diversion program for first-time youth offenders and their families with low-level offenses. And we provide services in the community by the two culturally specific providers, Latino Network and POIC. And so each community, just kind of general overview, each community-based agency receives the referral from the juvenile department. And the department sources the referrals to each agency by target population. So Latino Network gets all of the Latinx youth, and the African American youth go to POIC. And youth youth that have other racial and ethnic backgrounds are evenly sorted between the two programs. Next slide, please. So we see some of the eligible offenses that were agreed between the DA and the juvenile department here in Multnomah County. And throughout the years, we've been able to see trends in terms of police agencies, local police agencies making the most referrals, and trends on incident locations and type of offenses. And it has allowed the program to strategize agency partnerships and the development of new connections. A few years ago, for example, we were noticing a lot of referrals coming from the local mall. So we were able to, with the support of the department, to reach back to the mall, and we provided an anti-bias training for their security staff in hopes of reducing the amount of youth that were getting sent to the department because they were committing theft at the mall. Next slide. So these are very specific phases of our program. So the first one is outreach to the families. So once we get the referral, we try to connect with the families, and this actually is the most challenging piece sometimes because families are hard to track. So we do home visits, send postcard, texts, all of these, trying to schedule a time to meet with the families and tell them about the program. The program is completely voluntary. Once we meet with the families, we use a juvenile crime prevention screening tool. And also we do a family and youth needs assessment to identify areas of need and support, and also highlight strengths for the family and the youth. And then we move into the engagement phase of the program, where the coordinator, the care coordinator, meets with the youth, and they develop a success plan that is youth-driven. And then we work with the young person in breaking down the plan and identify clear steps and supports needed to accomplish the success plan, the goals. So this intervention usually lasts between 4 to 9 months, varying in the need of the young person and the family. And during this time of engagement, the family is wrapped in services, welcome to participate in our ongoing parent groups, after-school activities, summer programming, everything that we offer as a larger agency. And then at the end, nearing the 6 or 9 month mark, the coordinator and the young person get together to chart next steps. And even though this is a light touch intervention, families and youth often continue to be engaged in our agency's larger programming and reach back to us in times of need. For fiscal year 19, we've had 102 referrals, and 61 of those families referred to us were as accepted services, that engaged in services. And for this year, fiscal year 2020, we've received 84 referrals, and so far we've had 74% of those families accept services. So next one. Oh, here's some information about the the data we are collecting, how many, I mean, just your regular race, ethnicity, gender, geographic location, type of offense, number of cases, all of that. And next one. And for this one, Brian, you need to click a bunch of times. So these are our actions for accountability, healing, and family transformation. So we create personal safety. We work collaborative with families, including the youth, service providers, and institutions. So we engage everyone. We enhance self-esteem and determination in not only the youth and the parents we work with, but in our service team. We reunite family ties that have been disrupted by improving bonding, sense of belonging, recreate a predictable structure and clear roles. And we also empower parents to reestablish the adult protective shield and monitoring. We build respect to our elders and parents, and we make each other accountable for community and personal safety and inclusivity. We address the root causes of violence and contribute to the healing of individual, collective, and vicarious trauma. We celebrate heritage and strengthen spirituality, and we create opportunities to enhance education and leadership. Next one. And this is the last slide, and it says that we are inspired by the resiliency and beauty of our community and all the under its willingness to come together and build from within. So, gracias.
Thank you. So we have a few minutes for some questions, and I guess the one I want to pose, actually, it can be directed initially for Jimena, but others could take a stab at this also, but is, and it relates back to the point you made about referrals and the difficulty sometimes getting from a point of referral to the actual delivery of the service. And so I guess the question was, are there strategies for making successful referrals for mental health treatment? You know, often addressing the gap that you around, you know, referrals that are made, but they never actually make the connection to the actual delivery of the service. And I know you cited that as one of the challenges, and you mentioned some of the things you do, but what are some strategies that you've employed to actually engage and provide supports for young people who may be referred but may be reluctant to connect?
Thank you. So our program is not mental health services, but we do care coordination. So if a family is in need of mental health services, we will connect the family to resources in the community. So we are not the providers itself of the mental health services. Does that make sense?
Does anyone else want to take that question in terms of how to make sure that treatment connections are made?
So yes, I have some observations from some other projects that we are working on that involve the child welfare system. And so there's a project here in Los Angeles called SLACWE. And what SLACWE did is to enter into a partnership of organizations that would be providing the kind of commonly needed and sought after services for families engaged with child welfare. And they do a lot of internal coordination and what they call warm handoffs, so that it's not a kind of, the referral process is much more engaged by the partners in the organizations in collaboration with the families and the children. And in this warm handoff process, they maintain connection across the partners to make sure that the understanding of the needs are being met. And then where they see issues and gaps in the systems, they work to address that simultaneous to the independent referrals. The other thing also in terms of the child welfare system on yet another project we were involved in was working with grandparents who were taking care of children in their families to keep them out of the foster care system. And the navigators, which were grandmothers themselves who had gone through the process, were much more effective in the referral engagement and follow through than having the professionals be the ones that were trying to navigate the referral process. So referrals were more successful in terms of follow through and actually connecting and actually utilizing services.
And I'll add to that, I forgot to, this is the second piece, we are not the mental health providers, but we do that warm handoff. So often our coordinators are, once the family has identified that there is a need for services, then we will drive them to appointments, sit with them in the first appointment, help to translate paperwork, help to do a lot of these, helping the family feel comfortable to access services that were not accessible prior to our engagement with the families. So a lot of service navigation, care coordination, making sure that families are getting to where they want to get. So.
Okay, I think we have one final question that I want to pose, and that is, what mental health screening tools do you recommend for youth entering detention? And also, what are some of the trauma screening tools that you'd recommend? This could be anybody who has a response.
I have a hard time answering that question. I have to be really 100% frank. This is Cheryl. I don't know that there are tools out there that we have sufficiently vetted that I can say is a good mental health assessment tool. And what I mean by the vetting is there are problems in equivalence of method and equivalence of meaning with a lot of the survey and assessment and screening tools that we use. The questions don't necessarily mean the same thing to the young people and their families that they mean to those who have created them. The way in which the data collection process happens doesn't necessarily promote a lot of self-disclosure. Trust has not been built when people are asking very, very personal and sensitive questions. And then the way in which we understand human functioning and human behavior and signs of wellness, illness, and distress have not necessarily been identified or articulated in a way that reflects cultural differences. And we see this very, very, very clearly in a statewide initiative in California called the California Reducing Disparities Project. So I would encourage folks to actually go to the website of the Office of Health Equity in the California Department of Public Health and look up the Phase 1 Priority Population Reports, which go into great detail about the need to actually have more culturally grounded approaches to prevention, early intervention, and mental health services for communities of color. And there's a priority population for each of 5 groups: LGBTQ, Native American, Asian American, African American, and Latinx. So if you can't find it on their website, you can go to the website of the Psychology Applied Research Center, and we actually have all of the priority population reports there for you to access. So I can't say that I can vouch for one that exists out there right now. I'm sorry, I just can't.
Okay, well, we are at 3 o'clock, so I think we need to wrap up. As any, Cheryl, I think, as the lead, do you have any final comments that you'd like to make before we wrap up? And then we can, after that, we'll thank the panel and thank the participants for joining us. But Cheryl, any final comments?
Yeah, I just would like to encourage people to take a look at the report and to really consider and engage in some dialogue and soul searching around some of the questions that we raise. We raise more questions than we answer. And that's because we have a lot of work still to do collectively. And at the end of the day, we have to do this work because children are counting on us. Children are hurting. And we have not done the best that we can do to serve them and to understand the circumstances that they're dealing with and the incredible resilience despite these challenges that they exhibit. So I would like to thank all of our panelists and to thank Brian and his colleagues for hosting this panel, and look forward to future discussions about the Color of Justice report.
And on behalf of the foundation, I'd like to thank, Cheryl and the Alliance, all its partners, for preparing this report. It's a very important report, and for participating on this this webinar today. So thank you.